a generations expert, and I talk about what I call demographic disruption, because we hear an awful lot about disruption coming from technology, but actually I'm seeing the real social shifts, the real change, the real disruption coming from people. Let me give you an example of a girl called Zoey, who I was interviewing as part of my book research. Zoey is a 17-year-old girl from Penzance in Cornwall. And I was asking Zoey, how do you like to spend your spare time? And she said, I was half expecting her to say an app I'd never heard of. And she looked at me quite intensely and she said, do you know what? I've really discovered books. I've really got into reading. And yeah, it's become a real kind of fashion amongst my friends to take selfie pictures of their bookshelves and upload them onto social media. I've sort of thought about Zoey and have thought about Zoey a lot because she, I think, illustrates some of the surprising things that are coming and emerging out of Generation Z, who we assume are digital natives and are obsessed with technology, but have actually had it so saturated in their lives from such a young age, they are seeking out different ways of living in this world and indeed coping with too much technology. Second example of a guy in Paris that I was interviewing, an 18-year-old called Vikram. And I was interviewing him about his career hopes for the future, his ambitions for his life. And he said to me, very confidently, one may say cockily, yep, I want to do 10 years in investment banking, then I want to become a geologist in the Middle East. That was his life plan, this 18-year-old. And I was like, wow, God, I wouldn't even have thought, 6 months ahead, let alone 20 years ahead at that age. And I said, well, how are you preparing for this career this multi-stage career that you are wanting? And he said, well, I've really started focusing on my net rep. And I said, well, you mean your internet reputation? And he said, yeah, no, I never post pictures of myself on social media now unless I'm in a suit. My digital footprint is my CV. And he was starting to think about his career and his net rep in a sophisticated and long-term way that I certainly didn't. And it says to me in those two examples of Vikram and his net rep, and Zoey and her shelfie, that we are seeing the next generation coming through being very different consumers and very different workers, very different in their values and what they're prioritizing and what their behaviors are and how they are acting differently from generations. And for a lot of families across the world, the biggest issue, and this is a real issue for financial services in particular, is inheritance. For millennials who are waiting on the baby boomer buck, it's a massive, massive thing. For Gen X who are having to look after their elderly parents, it's a massive, massive thing. The great wealth transfer, which in places like India and China is the first time inheritance on a big scale is becoming an issue, is suddenly about understanding the different generations and what they're prioritizing and how they're even thinking about money. One of the biggest social transformations in the last 20 years is something no one talks about, which is what I call the rise of the kidults. And it's the process of basically being younger for longer. But I think moving on to what society in itself is happening is we need to start thinking about multi-generational businesses. We need to be thinking about multi-generational workplaces and multi-generational consumer spaces.